For this lesson, you need to open the sample file Expenses Claim 2 from your Sample Files folder. This is the macro-enabled workbook that you saved in Lesson 9.12. And because it contains a macro, when you open it, one of three things will happen. The first possibility is that the workbook opens without warnings and macros are enabled. The second possibility is the possibility you're seeing here, that Excel will display a security warning, this is the default setting, and allow you to enable the content if you want to. In other words, allow the macros to run. You might not see this warning on your own machine, because if you're the user that last saved this workbook, it would be illogical to distrust yourself. But if you opened Expenses Claim 2 from your Sample Files folder, and you haven't previously overwritten the file, then you should see this security warning. And the third possibility is that the workbook will open without warnings, but the macros will be disabled. And you can select which of these behaviours will take place when a user opens a file. It doesn't matter which is the case on your computer at the moment. This lesson will show you how to set up the macro security options to any of the above. And to set up the macro security options, I click File on the ribbon, and then Options from the left-hand menu bar. I'll just resize that dialog so that you can still see the wording on the screen. Then I'm going to click Trust Center on the left-hand menu bar, and then the Trust Center Settings button. Once again, I'll resize the dialog, and then I'll click Macro Settings on the left-hand menu bar. And you can see that there are 4 possible macro settings. Let's look at how each of these options relates to the possibilities I outlined earlier. First of all, the workbook opens without warnings and macros are enabled. This setting is Enable all macros not recommended, potentially dangerous code can run. This is an option that you should really never use, because any macro-enabled workbook will immediately open with the macros intact. And if you're not sure about the origins of the workbook, this could infect your machine with a macro virus. In fact, you could even argue that that fourth option shouldn't really be there at all. The second possibility was Excel displays a security warning. This is the default setting. And this option relates to Disable all macros with notification. That means that you'll see the security warning and be given the option of enabling the macros, if you trust the workbook, or the option of leaving the macros disabled if you don't trust the workbook. This is the best option for an informed user, because you can decide whether or not you want the macros to be allowed to run. And the last option, the workbook opens without warning but the macros are disabled, relates to Disable all macros without notification. This means that the user will never be able to open a macro-enabled workbook and run the macros, because the macros will be disabled and there'll be no possibility for the user to enable them. This is the option that you'd choose if you had novice users that really didn't understand what macros were all about, and you might worry that one of them might click the Enable Content button and accidentally run a virus-infected macro. And notice there's also a fourth option, which is Disable all macros except digitally signed macros. In Lesson 7.14, you learned that it's possible to obtain a digital certificate by paying a third-party authority for an annual subscription. By signing a workbook with a digital signature, it's possible to confirm who is the publisher of the workbook. In order for Excel to suppress the normal security warnings, 5 conditions must be met. First of all, the workbook must be signed with a digital signature. Secondly, the workbook must not have been changed since the digital certificate was added. Thirdly, the digital certificate must not have expired. The fourth condition is that the digital certificate must have been issued by a certificate authority recognized as reputable by Microsoft. And finally, the publisher must appear on your Trusted Publisher list. Whenever you open a workbook with a valid digital certificate, you'll be prompted with the name of the publisher and asked whether you want to add the publisher to your Trusted Publishers list. To view the publishers currently appearing on your Trusted Publishers list, you can click Trusted Publishers on the left-hand menu bar. And you can see that I'm trusting 4 publishers at the moment: Steinberg, OpenVPN Technologies, Jetico, and Creative Technology. And I can see that all of these publishers' certificates have expired, with the exception of OpenVPN Technologies Incorporated. Perhaps I really shouldn't be trusting the other 3. If I wanted to view one of these digital certificates, I would choose the certificate holder. Let's choose OpenVPN Technologies, and then click the View button. I can then see details of OpenVPN's certificate. I'll now go back to Macro Settings by clicking Macro Settings on the left-hand menu bar. Well, earlier I said that Disable all macros with notification was the best option for the informed user. So make sure that this option is selected and then click OK and OK again to dismiss the dialogues. I'm not going to click the Enable Content button, because if I did this, I'd create a trusted document. Trusted documents will be discussed in the next lesson, lesson 9.14. Instead, I'm going to prove that the macros are disabled in this document because I haven't clicked the Enable Content button. So let's try to run the expense fill-in macro. I'll delete the current contents of each of the boxes and then click View on the ribbon, Macros group, Macros, View Macros. I'll select my fill-in expense form macro and click Run. And a dialog appears telling me that macros have been disabled. This is what I expected, of course, so I'll close that dialog. Now let's see how trusted folders work. If you designate a folder for your trusted macro-enabled workbooks, Excel will know that they're trusted and not bother you with any warnings in future. For extra security, the trusted folder should always be a non-shared folder on your local hard disk drive, not on a network drive. So let's create a trusted folder now to see this working. To do this, I'll open File Explorer, I'll go to my C drive, and I'll create a new folder. And I'll call the folder Trusted Files. Now I'll go to my Practice folder, I'll go to Expert Skills Session 9, and I'll copy that same file, Expenses Claim 2, into my Trusted Files folder. Now I'll return to Excel, and I need to tell Excel where my Trusted Files folder is. To do that, I click File, then Options, then Trust Center, then I'll click the Trust Center Settings button, and click Trusted Locations on the left menu bar. You can see the existing trusted locations that are on my computer at the moment. But I'm going to add a new location, so I'll click the Add New Location button, then I'll click Browse, and I'll find that trusted folder. That's on the C drive, and it's called Trusted Files. I'll click OK and OK again, and you can see that Trusted Files has now been added to the top of my Trusted Folders list. So I'll click OK and OK again now to close the dialogues. Now I'm going to close Expenses Claim 2, and I'm going to open it from my Trusted Files folder. And when I do that, I'll expect it to open without showing the security warning. So I'll close Excel, then I'll reopen Excel, and I'll open the file, this time from my Trusted Files folder. And when I open Expenses Claim 2, notice that no security warning is shown. And that's because this macro-enabled workbook was saved into my Trusted Files folder. Now I'm going to see if the macros are enabled. So I'll delete the current contents of the cells, then I'll click View on the ribbon. In the Macros group, Macros, I'll select the Fill in Expense Form macro and click Run. And this time, the macro runs perfectly. There's no need to save this file because I've not changed it in any way. So I'll close Excel, and you've now completed Lesson 9.13, Implement Macro Security.